All right, so today I want you to use a piece of scrap paper and you are going to illustrate what you hear in some way. So you could draw like symbols of what I'm reading. You could draw like a scene of what I read. You could, I mean, those are really your two options. Or you could draw like a bunch of little scenes that I read because more than one thing happens usually, you know. Excuse me. So you could, or you could just draw one scene, or you could draw a whole bunch of little symbols. So you know, like draw something that makes you like evokes what I'm reading. Yes. You can draw stick people, yeah. I'm not looking for high art. I'm looking for you listening and you connecting onto the paper. And you can connect with stick people. That's fine. All right. So Brady is hanging out with his cousin Carl. And they got sub sandwiches and they rented a movie. Well, it's his uncle. Well, because he calls it, you know, honestly, because he said Carl lived with his mother, my Aunt Tracy. So it's either, so like that would be a cousin, right? Yeah. But I also thought that Carl was his uncle because he's like older. Like he's like a full-on adult. Yeah. Yeah. The movie we rented, Blade Runner, was an old one. We'd seen it 100 times, but we took our shoes off, put our feet up on the coffee table in the living room, and enjoyed the heck out of seeing it again. It did bother me, though, how those futuristic replicants with their limited 4-year lifespans desperately wanted to live longer. The whole movie was about getting more life, and it got to me after a while. I had to leave the room, but I knew Carl didn't notice. I told him I had to use the bathroom. I wondered as I stared out of my Aunt Tracy's bathroom window if what had happened to Ben would hang like a bag of stones on my heart for the rest of my life, dragging me down. And I wondered what it would be doing to JT and Digger. Later, while he was driving me home, Carl asked if we were going down to the Crab Fest in Crisfield. His question surprised me because Crisfield is about a 3-hour drive away. I don't think so, I replied. Why? Why would we? Why would you? He turned and made a face like, duh, because the watermen are planning that big protest. In Crisfield, I asked. Crisfield's in the middle of nowhere. Anybody in this state goes to Crisfield for that crab fest, Carl explained. Delegates, state senators, the governor, all the political poobahs, and those media people there too. The newspaper, TV, this is a big issue, Ben. Brady. Oh, I was beginning to understand. I just hope it doesn't get nasty, Carl said. What do you mean? You think someone might get violent? Carl stayed focused on his driving. Some of those watermen are pretty ticked off. I suppose anything could happen. Geez, Carl, you think Dad should go? Carl rolled a toothpick in his mouth. I don't know, he finally said. It's a tough issue. The new regulations are hitting those guys hard. Crabbing's their livelihood, Brady. Some of them, they don't know anything else. I felt bad that I'd been so wrapped up in my own troubles. I hadn't even thought about Dad. I knew he had mixed feelings about the new crab regulations because of what he said the other night when he got that message from Tink Bosley. When Carl stopped his car in front of our house, I told him, thanks, I had a good time. He waved me off. Don't mention it. Let's think about taking a little camping trip next month, okay? Up to the Cactons, maybe? Sure, that would be fun, I said before getting out. Hey, Carl called after me, leaning across the seat so he could see me through the open window. Tell your dad to be careful tomorrow. When I opened the kitchen door to the house, Tilly practically mowed me down. She wanted me out so bad. I glimpsed the back of Mom. She had her bathrobe on and her hair caught up in a big clip. I heard the clink of dishes in the sink. Home, I called in, taking Tilly out. She turned around and smiled. I walked into the butterfly garden while Tilly went off to do her business. I spied a big toad making his way down the brick pathway to the moonlight. In the moonlight. Like that toad, my mom was kind of hopping from one thing to another. My concern for Dad and that crab goodness gracious, my mind was kind of hopping from one thing to another. My concern for Dad and that crab protest, JT and his dad, me and the D'Angelos. I wondered what I would do when I quit working for the D'Angelos. I still didn't want to go back out on the water, but I wasn't old enough to work at the hardware store or down at the 7-Eleven. And worst of all, I still didn't feel right about what I'd done with the drill. Life just wasn't moving forward the way it was supposed to, not just for me either. Because what if Mrs. D'Angelo never got over losing Ben? And what if Mr. D'Angelo never stopped blaming his wife for Ben's death? And how were JT and Digger and I going to live our whole lives keeping all this a secret? Frustrated, I swiped at a daisy and nipped the blossom right off. Tilly nudged my leg, and I knelt down to hug her around the neck. She gave me a bunch of kisses on the face, and I let her. I was thinking that I could get a hold of myself because I still had a lot of good things in my life. Mom and Dad and Tilly, high school and college, my dream of being an architect. Suddenly, a movement in the darkness caught my eye. The toad had hopped up on one of the thick, flat-topped rocks we had set in the garden. Tilly, look! She started to lunge, but I had her by the collar. Ah, leave him be, I whispered as the toad sat still in the statue of his tiny moonlit stage. The toad's rock belonged to the butterflies, so they could sit in the morning sun and dry the dew off their wings. Now that Mom and I could talk about things, about Amanda anyway, I thought of asking her just how the garden helped her. I knew she didn't plant it just to keep herself busy. And I remembered that one time Mom told us butterflies symbolize hope. But did she mean hope for us? For her and Dad and me, or hope for Amanda? Did she think Amanda's soul could live on somehow? And if Mom believed that, then what about other kids who died? Like Ben, could the little butterfly asleep on their locust tree, drying his wings off on our rock in the morning, symbolize hope for Ben too? I'll tell you, I thought about things that night that never ever crossed my mind before. When I shook my head and looked away, I noticed the light was on down in Dad's workshop. Come on, I said, clapping to Tilly as I headed toward the barn. Dad was sweeping the floor when I walked in. Hey, he said, how was the movie? Good, it was fun. A set of new hatchway doors for someone's boat leaned up against my father's workbench. He must have just finished them because he always cleaned up after he finished a project. Tilly sniffed the pile of sawdust and Dad shooed her away with a broom. Carl asked me if you were going to Chrisfield tomorrow, I said. Dad kept sweeping and I wasn't sure he heard the question. No, he said after a while. Pushing my hands into my pockets, I studied him. I guess it was a tough decision, huh? Nah, Dad wrinkled his nose. Not so tough. He swept his pile onto a dustpan. There was an old kitchen stool in the workshop. I pulled my hands out of my pockets, hauled the stool over, and sat down. But aren't the other watermen gonna give you a hard time now? I'm sure they will, Brady, Dad replied as he dumped the contents of the dustpan into a big garbage can. I was confused, and Dad finally noticed. He leaned the broom against the workbench and brushed off his hands. My mother, your grandmother Ellen, she used to say to me, Tommy, if you know right from wrong, then the answer is always right there, smack in front of you. It's when you get to thinking on it that you get into trouble, because doing what's right is not always the easiest thing. And there's no doubt, Dad continued, it would be far easier for me to go along with the other fellers, drive down to Chrisfield tomorrow and hold up a sign, raise hell with the governor for clamping down on us, and keep crabbing these waters till they ain't nothing left. He rested his hands on the edge of the workbench. But I'll tell you, Brady, it's wrong. It's the wrong thing for the Bay, and it's the wrong thing for me. I stared at my father, astonished. You're going to give up crabbing? No, not give it up completely, but you said yourself, Brady, we have to respect the Bay's balance. Take the long look. Live more sensitively. I was just telling you what the scientist at school said. But you're right. That scientist is right, and I've known it all along. Then Dad said something that made me stop breathing. It's just that sometimes, he said, even when the right answer is smack in front of you, you got to reach deep inside yourself to act on it. You know what I'm saying? I nodded and I swallowed hard too, because I understood perfectly. Only I was not thinking of saving the blue crab now. I was thinking about Ben and Ben's parents. I was thinking about reaching inside to do the right thing so they would know the truth. So Mr. D'Angelo knew it wasn't his wife's fault. So Mrs. D'Angelo would stop blaming herself. And so JT and Digger and I faced the world and admitted what really happened. Dad plopped down noisily in an old chair and put his feet up on a toolbox. but I am not going to lose any sleep over it. No sirree. I got more work in this here shop than I know what to do with. One less waterman out there a couple days a week ain't going to hurt nobody. He leaned back, putting his hands behind his head. And I'll tell you, I won't miss getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning neither. Dad, I said soberly. I got off the stool and stood. If I were to ask you to do something really strange, but I said it was the most important thing in the whole world to me, would you do it? My father kind of chuckled and said, it depends on whether it's legal or not, I guess. I had to grin. It's legal. Then, yeah, sure. He brought his arm down and sat up. If it was really important to you, son. The grin slid off my face. Then I need to ask you. Dad leaned forward listening. I hesitated because I knew that once I said something, I could never take it back and that everyone would be changed by it. But it was the right thing to do. In my heart, I had known it all along. I wondered, Dad, if you would hook up the oyster dredger to the Miss Amanda and help me haul something out of the river. Arching his eyebrows, my father took a long, hard look at me. It was uncanny, but it was almost as though he could read my thoughts. He asked in a quiet voice, would that be the red kayak, Brady? I did not turn away. Yes, sir. Silence for a moment. Why? He asked. Why in the world do you need to do that? I couldn't tell him why. Not then. It's just something that I have to do, I said firmly, and Dad accepted that. To this day, I'm not sure why I couldn't have told him the whole truth of it right then, but I've sometimes wondered if it wasn't because deep down inside, I still harbored the tiny, flickering flame of hope that if we found the red kayak, its hull would be as smooth and intact as the day Mr. D'Angelo brought it home, a glistening shell, a new toy on top of his old silver Porsche.